Hello, I am Dr. Drew Lichtenberg, the resident dramaturg at the Shakespeare Theater Company, and welcome to Shakespeare Hour Live. Well, it is starting to feel a lot like winter here in Washington, D.C. It's getting dark very early at night. It is quite cold out, so we thought, what better play to talk about than a play titled The Winter's Tale? Before we get started, I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors. The Shakespeare Hour Live is a component of Shakespeare Everywhere, which is made possible by the visionary support of the Beach Street Foundation. Additional support for Shakespeare Hour Live is provided by Nan Beckley, and tonight's episode has been sponsored by Christopher M. and Andrita J. Andreas. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel of guests. First, joining us is Arin Arbus, OBIE award-winning director, resident director at Theater for a New Audience in New York, where she directed The Winter's Tale in 2018. Arin, are you there?
I am here. Hi.
And I think I have an idea of where you are broadcasting from, but where in the United States or in international waters are you joining us from?
I'm joining all of you from Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York, where Theater for New Audience is. And how are you doing, Arin?
I'm okay. I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. Next, I want to introduce Linda Emond, three-time Tony Award nominee, whose numerous theater credits include Death of a Salesman, which I believe was on Broadway opposite Phil Seymour Hoffman, Cabaret, and 3 productions of The Winter's Tale. She was telling us right before we went on live. Linda, are you there?
I'm here. Hello.
And are you also in New York?
I am. I'm in the city. I'm in Manhattan, though, but I am. Yes.
And is it okay if I ask, like, what neighborhood in Manhattan you're broadcasting from?
A recent move to Upper West Side, right before the pandemic. In fact, I lived on the East Side forever in a rent-stabilized apartment, and finally made a move. And I live on the Upper West Side now.
Wow, so that's like a whole identity transformation.
Except that I haven't really been able to experience it that much because everything pretty much shut down right after I moved. So I'm still learning.
And you played, so you've been in The Winter's Tale 3 times, and did you play the same role all 3 times, or was it different? And where were the theaters where you performed in The Winter's Tale?
Yeah, no, I consider myself very lucky to have done it 3 times. And the first time I did it was at Colorado Shakespeare Festival I wrote it down, 1982. I played Hermione. And then 8 years later, in 1990, I played Paulina at the Goodman Theater. The great director Frank Galati directed that production. And then, bizarrely somewhat, because I was, let's say, probably a little long in the tooth to do it, in 2010, so 30 years after the first time, I played Hermione again. And that was probably my favorite because it was Shakespeare in the park. And to do The Winter's Tale in the park is pretty magical. This is, by the way, I showed Drew, this was a button, I don't know if y'all can see that was from that summer. And there were different ones, they had quotes, but this one says, "Oh, she's warm," which is, of course, what Leontes says when Hermione, the statue, comes to life. So I cherish that and suddenly remembered today that I had it.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful lines in all of Shakespeare, and certainly if you ever see a production of The Winter's Tale, those 3 words will make you cry for sure. So yeah, playing Hermione so many years apart and in the park, thrill of a lifetime, I'm sure. Also joining us, thank you, Linda, for being here. Also joining us is Dr. Niamh O'Leary, Associate Board Member at Cincinnati Shakespeare Festival, Associate Professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati, and co-host of the podcast. I love the title of your podcast, Niamh, The Good, the Bard, and the Ugly. Is that a tie-in to Ennio Morricone's movies and Shakespeare's plays?
Oh my goodness. I am not I will have to ask my co-host Jeremy Dubin, who is a deft hand with a pun, is the one who came up with that title. So I will have to ask him if there is a specific Morcone call out. I will say it was our second title. Our first title, there was an existing podcast under the name, so we had to change streams. And that was Jeremy's second title. Yeah, we're stuck with it now. We are GBU.
Right. Okay, so the podcast that will not be named, but and Niamh, are you joining us from Cincinnati? Is that correct?
Yes, many consider it the New York of the Midwest. Yes,
Well,
indeed.
Yeah. I mean, Chicago has nothing on Cincinnati for sure. Well, thank you for being here, Dr. O'Leary. Finally, last but certainly not least, I'm joined by my STC colleague and special guest co-host for tonight's show, Grace Ann Roberts. Grace Ann, are you there in Cleveland Park?
I am. I'm still here in Cleveland Park. So it's great to be with you all again. Yeah, live once more.
All right, so before we get to our sort of guiding question for the first segment of the show, I wonder if, Grace Ann, if you could refresh us a little bit on why we've chosen to talk about The Winter's Tale, because we have touched on it in previous shows. Am I not wrong?
Yeah, it's come up a lot actually since we started Shakespeare Hour Live. So we've been going since April 22nd. And in May, we did an episode for those of you who are longtime viewers on Hope and Rebirth, where we focused on The Winter's Tale and The Tempest. So it was kind of the two plays wrapped together. It was a fabulous conversation with Rebecca Teichman and Patrick Page and Peter Marks. And it's on YouTube, and you should go back and watch it if you're interested. But we've never had the opportunity just to delve into The Winter's Tale on its own. And it's such a rich text. And, you know, it's come up. We've heard from some of you that you'd like to discuss it more. So we thought we could dedicate a whole hour to the play. So that's what brings us here tonight.
Yeah, and I think I remember Patrick Page had just played Prospero, so he talked a lot about The Tempest, and we felt like we wanted to revisit it. And for those of you at home who don't remember The Winter's Tale super well, it's the one with the bear. It's also the one that is set in two wildly different locations, right? The first half of the play is set in Sicily with Leontes, and it's probably some of the bleakest writing in the canon. Leontes becomes convinced, like Othello, that his wife Hermione is having an affair with his best friend Polixenes, forces her to stand trial. His son catches an ague, catches a fever, and dies. He banishes Hermione and her unborn child. Hermione dies, we think, in the trial scene. And the second half of the play is set, and I love this, at the seacoast of Bohemia. Now, if anyone's ever been to Prague or the Czech Republic, you know that Bohemia has no seacoast. It's a landlocked country. Shakespeare has a little bit of a loose grasp of the geography of Eastern Europe, but that doesn't matter. Antigonus, who saves the daughter Perdita of Leontes, is eaten by a bear. She is found and raised as a shepherdess, discovered by Polixenes' son, Prince Florizel. They elope, run off back to Sicily, where the statue scene happens. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's one of the most magical scenes in Shakespeare. So it's a very unusual play, both in its dramatic structure and in the fact that it seems to be a play of two halves, or maybe even three parts, right? The Sicily part, the Bohemia part, and then whatever happens at the end of the play. So we thought we would ask our guests tonight to contextualize the play for us. What is so unique about this play? What makes it so unique in the canon? And really, I've heard anecdotally, it's a play that actors love, directors love, audiences love, critics love, perhaps more than other Shakespeare plays. And secondarily, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, Arin is like, no, not at all. Secondarily, it's also considered, I think, a director killer of a play. Very, very difficult play. And secondarily, how does this play that breaks so many of the rules of Aristotelian structure, how does this play succeed in the theater? How do you make it succeed if you're a practitioner, or why do you think it succeeds in theoretical terms? So Niamh, I'm really curious to hear how you respond to this question. What makes this play so unique? And despite breaking the rules, what makes it succeed?
Great questions. I will openly admit this is one of my two favorite Shakespeare plays. I love this unabashedly, so I will stand this hard on this episode and fight back against anyone who disagrees. I think one of the things that's really unique, and I will admit that in prepping for the conversation this evening, I revisited a couple of my favorite sources whenever I want to rethink a play. One is Marjorie Garber's brilliant Shakespeare After All, and the other is Emma Smith's series of lectures approaching Shakespeare. And I love her Winter's Tale lecture. I love you. We got the same books on our shelves. Is that what you're showing me? Yep. So Emma Smith makes this point that Tempest and Winter's Tale really, it's a toss-up which one is Shakespeare's true farewell to the stage, but we don't have the biographical logic for claiming that Winter's Tale is, and so we tend to fixate on Tempest. Tempest has gotten its pop culture coronation because of the ways in which we can give it a biographical reading. Winter's Tale shares a lot with it, but notably distinct is you have the same fundamental tension between two men, Leontes and Polixenes, but unlike the tension in Tempest between Prospero and his brother, this tension in Winter's Tale is resolved by and requires the presence of women in Hermione and Paulina. And Paulina is one of my favorite characters in the entire canon. I absolutely adore her. So I think that's part of what is unique. I also think the level of spectacle in this play is unique. Primarily, it's so concentrated at the end, but it is so noteworthy. It is one of the few plays that has a shocker in it, a shocking moment. Usually the plays unfold more or less as we think they're going to unfold, and this is such a great moment of startle. And one of the things that I love about this play, yes, uneven genre-wise, it gives us what we're curious about at the end of tragedies. What happens at the end of a tragedy? This play gives us the next bit. What comes after you've destroyed your life? And we see that. So to really focus on answering the second question there, how does this play get away with completely ignoring the Aristotelian unities? It doesn't even try to pretend it's not. We have time as a character coming on stage, being a human speaking title card, letting us know 16 years later, there is a sort of admission of the contrivance, which I think helps. And at the same time, that dramatic shift is naturalized through links to the natural world. You've got the seasonal logic of the play. It's the Winter's Tale. In Sicilia, we're in winter and dark and tragedy. Mamilius, a sad tale's best for winter. And then bam, it's spring. And there's a sheep shearing festival. So we're in the abundant, verdant countryside with new life and new growth and long conversations about botany. Just to point us to all of this nature-based logic for the shifts that are happening in the play. And you have the move from the court to the country and back, which we're familiar with from Greenworld comedy, like As You Like It, that has a place in the canon, even if deployed unusually here. And there is a need for the latter half of the play to repair the broken pieces from the start of the play. And here I'll refer to a concept I get from Carol Thomas Neely in her book about broken nuptials in Shakespeare. She talks about these broken ceremonies that need to be completed, like the interrupted wedding in Much Ado. And in this, it's the interrupted childbirth. I actually have studied, researched quite a bit on childbirth ceremonies and practices in the early modern period. And boy, am I a fun dinner party guest with talking about that. But I think that this play really stages an interrupted childbirth that must be a ceremonial conclusion comes at the end, because when Hermione awakens, she only speaks to Perdita. That is the only direct address. And she calls for blessings to be poured down upon her daughter. There is a moment of christening at the end of the play. I argue. And lastly, another element of the play that enables that naturalizes this disruption of Aristotelian unities is its foregrounding of the very concept of fable and tale telling. And this is something that Colleen mentioned in your episode last week about the supernatural, from Mamilius's A Sad Tale's Best for Winter, to Antigonus's Dream, to women throughout the play as storytellers, and women in early modern and medieval culture as storytellers. And in particular in this, I'm interested in Paulina's narration, both of Perdita's birth, when she's presenting her as the legitimate child to Leontes, and then later her narration of the statue of Hermione when she effects a reunion. So I'll cut myself off for now, but I think tale telling, natural logic, completing broken ceremonies, and just the very explicit engagement in the strangeness of the play is what makes it work.
Yeah, thank you, Niamh, for that brilliant overview. And as you say, it ignores some of the obvious unities, but then if you look on a deeper level, there are all of these symmetries and unities that are of an imaginative variety that hold the play together. Yeah, you mentioned Marjorie Garber, Shakespeare After All. She's always here by my side. You also mentioned the time scene, and that to me is such a killer because it's actually, I believe it's a sonnet, right? Or it's written in a rhyme pattern, but the rhyme is so weirdly enjambed and the meaning spills over to the next line that it doesn't sound like it's in any kind of alternating rhyme at all. And of course, the director has to decide who is going to play time. Is it going to be Antigonus or Perdita or Hermione, who is dead at that point in the play, we think? It's a puzzler. Linda, you and Hermione, how do you answer this question of what makes the play so unique as someone who's lived inside of it multiple times?
I think the best thing I can do is, because I've been someone who's inside the play in front of an audience, say that in all my experiences of doing the play, it's one that has been such a joy to do with the audience because of the fact that either those who come and know the play, there is almost a sense that they are aiming toward the end of the play and they want so much to see that beautiful scene at the end, and or they just go with it. I think that if there is a mistake that is made sometimes is in perhaps trying to make the play be more cohesive or something stylistically and whatever it is, when in fact what has worked in the productions that I've been in is absolutely having it be what it is when it is and going with it. And on the inside of it, it's been a beautiful thing to be in parts of the play that are, of course, very serious, very dramatic, very intense, and be backstage with actors who are about to come out and be ridiculous in some cases, but, clownish and ridiculous, and music and dancing and, full on clown behavior that's fantastic to watch. And so you have this juxtaposition as well with the actors who are involved in it, that it ends up being very joyful to do, because rather than being a part of something that from beginning to end is this one thing, it's everything. And the audience, in my experience of it 3 times, is so willing to just go with wherever it is. And I do think that they bite into Paulina. Playing Paulina is a thrilling part to play, yes. And part of it is because when there is such chaos as happens in that play, when there is insanity, I should say, that happens in the play, there is such a relief. And it is interesting, given what Niamh was just saying, that no matter how strong a statement for sanity Camillo makes, it's the stuff that Paulina says that the audience really grabs onto. And it's the stuff that really makes it land. They hear Camillo, they get it, whatever. But when Paulina comes out and starts talking, they absolutely glom onto you. And from there to the end of the play, they are so ready for anything that comes out of Paulina's mouth, because it's such a relief in the face of such insanity to hear that. And then, yes, to have I mean, I will say that experientially, again, playing Hermione is really bloody hard to play. It's what is worse than a mother, not only losing her, her child, but, losing love of her life. I mean, the levels of it or whatever, it's awful. But in the end, to answer your question, I do really think that overall, the play is magical. There is something that goes beyond words. And in the playing of it, to do that end of that play, especially the third time I did it, Shakespeare in the Park, which is just so magical. And the audience is it's very moving. It's very moving to be on stage as an audience wants rebirth, redemption of some kind, or maybe not, whatever, but wants life and wants magic in its way, and does not seem at all to care throughout the play about the particulars of sense or whatever. They're looking for a little bit of magic, and they get it.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite odd things about this play is that there's a reference to an Italian Renaissance sculptor who sculpted the statue of Hermione. It's Giulio Romano, and it's one of the only references in Shakespeare to a contemporary artist or to a Renaissance artist. And it seems like, Niamh was saying this might be his farewell to the theater. You're saying, Linda, when you perform it in the theater, people want so badly to believe in that moment of theatrical illusion made manifest that it's Shakespeare saying, she's not a ghost, she's not supernatural, she's a statue, she's a work of art who is so real that she comes to life. Isn't that what the theater is? And I love what you say about Paulina, because Camillo is the character who Leontes asks to kill Polixenes, right? Poison Polixenes. And Camillo won't do it. But he doesn't really stand up to Leontes. He just kind of runs away. He tells Polixenes about this plot and then runs off to Bohemia, whereas Paulina sticks around and she calls him a tyrant. She's the only character in the play who uses the T word, which at the time was like calling someone a fascist, right? And she is the real moral center of the play in a way that I think is unique in the canon, both as a woman and also just as a kind of advisor to a tyrannical figure. We have Gonzalo in The Tempest, but I would take Paulina over Gonzalo any day. Like, it's such a stronger figure, such a moral center. Arin, you're sitting here soaking all this in. I'm watching your facial reactions, which are wonderful. I feel like we're performing for you as a director. I'm getting a glimpse into your process. What do you think makes The Winter's Tale so unique as a play?
Well, honestly, I think all of his plays are completely unique and singular. And I think he was like a great experimenter as a writer, like one of the most experimental writers that we've ever had. And so I think he is constantly playing with form and trying to create new forms to deal with the territory that he's interested in. And I like Niamh said, and Jim Shapiro, who's a sort of great scholar, I asked him about the play, and he said, I think he is asking what is possible after tragedy. And, of course, Shakespeare had sort of already written his great Lear and Hamlet and Macbeth and Othello. He'd written all of those great tragedies. And if you believe in the man, he lost a child like Leontes 15 years prior to writing this play. And it feels like a deeply personal, incredibly urgent question to him, what is possible. And so this form, this like insane form that is completely its own, of its own nature, he, in that it's like a 3-act Greek tragedy and then a 1-act like pastoral comedy, song and dance pastoral, and then this final act that is just singular in its mysticism and as Linda described in its miraculous restoration. And I think, the death of Mamilius is what shatters the structure of the play. And as soon as he is dead, the play splits. I think it's like a totally unique, specific form. And I agree with what Linda said, which is that I think the way to deal with it is to do whatever the play is doing as it's doing it, and let it be what it is, because the structure of it is unique and is robust and is completely bizarre and beautiful. I find the play, for a while, for maybe 10 years or so, I was really attracted to the first 3 acts of the play. I was really interested in the misogyny and like Leonti's diseased imagination. And I just thought it was like, the nihilism and misogyny against faith within a marriage was really exciting to me. But and then in the last however many years, it was actually the latter half of the play that started to feel really urgent to me. And I really believe that, I know Shakespeare gives you an out, but I really believe that it's a miracle. I really believe she's a statue made of stone that comes to life. And I think that's what, like, the play to me seems like a wish of Shakespeare's, that a miracle is possible after tragedy.
Yeah, what you're saying, Arin, resonates so much with me as a dramaturg. Like, let Shakespeare be your teacher, right? Before seeking to cut him or fix him or alter him in any way, just do the play and trust the play. Even as, when you're mentioning the sheep shearing festival and all these references to flowers, and I'm just flashing on all of Autolycus's songs, and I'm like, oh my God, Act 4, Scene 4 is so fatal. It takes forever. It kills the play, dead in its tracks. It's such a problem to be solved. But what you're saying is, if you give into it, or maybe treat it intelligently with delicacy and care, you can learn profound things from this play. Maybe profounder than in some of the other plays in the canon. Although, as you say, every play he does is experimental. Grace Ann, you have been monitoring the chat, you've been listening. I wonder if you have anything to bring into this conversation about the uniqueness of The Winter's Tale?
I do. I have so many great questions. I wondered, though, if I could pick up on something all of you have touched on, but in terms of the latter half of the play, and Niamh, you posed the question, in this play, we get to see what happens after you've ruined your life. And I was rereading the play this week and just kind of thinking about it and turning it over. And in this reread, I was just so struck by how much time we get with Leontes in his sort of performance of contrition. And I can't think of another character in any other Shakespeare play that not only realizes their mistakes, wants to atone for their mistake, but that we get to spend a whole act with them, living that realization over and over. And there's just something really, I found in this moment in time, maybe as like a 21st century reader, to read how beautiful it was to read someone basically say over and over again, I was wrong. I just found that to be really satisfying in this recent reread. So I wanted to offer that. I have a few questions about some things we've all touched on, and I'll throw them out, and you can pick them up as you're inspired. So first, we have a question from Gretchen, who asks, what are everyone's thoughts on whether Hermione died or was hidden by Paulina, which Arin, you just addressed. Gretchen says, it seems a reread of the play seems to imply the latter. The second question that I want to just throw out to consider is from Pam. We were talking about time, the sort of chorus of time that comes in Act 4, 16 years have passed. And Pam asks, what do we know about how the Elizabethan audiences reacted to the unusual phenomenon of the 16 years later sort of jump? And finally, we have a question from James Carr, who says, how do you explain Leontes' insane jealousy? It seems to come from nowhere. How do productions make it believable? So, if anyone has seen a production, or Arin, maybe how you addressed it, Linda, in productions you've been in, what your thoughts are there. So
I just want to offer, not necessarily contra Arin, because I think that reading is a great one of Hermione actually dying and then being a statue who comes back to life. But it's so interesting because he leaves it ambiguous in the play. And when Rebecca Teichmann directed it at McCarter and at the Shakespeare Theater Company, she was insistent that Hermione was alive the whole time, those 16 years, living in Paulina's house down the block, and that Paulina was keeping her secret. And, in the play, she's the one in Act 4 and Act 5 who's ministering to Leontes' grief, which makes her actions all the more mind-boggling and remarkable if she's hiding Hermione all this time. But it's true that Shakespeare, he gives you an out. He doesn't definitively answer whether she's a statue or whether she's real. You have to make up your own mind. I wonder, Niamh or Linda, if you have thoughts on this crux in the play.
I choose also to believe that Hermione lives. And part of that is my own scholarly investment in depictions of close female relationships in early modern texts. And so the idea of this 16-year cloistering, this society, this very private, closed community between Hermione and Paulina is very appealing. And it's what's presented as a preferential option in a couple of the comedies, right? Olivia attempts this in Twelfth Night. Hero will join a nunnery if Claudio cannot be made to regret his actions. Theseus offers Hermia the option to become a votaress to Diana and cloister herself if she will not marry the man her father has chosen for her. So I really do think that there is space for that in the Shakespeare canon and an attractiveness to it. And I also connect it with my reading of Marina in Pericles, another character who is believed dead, but it turns out is not, and who has passed her time in a religious community. So I think that that's very much there. And I love the notion of the strength and beauty in the relationship between Hermione and Paulina, and believing that Hermione's alive this time lends so much deep and gutting tragedy to Paulina at the end of the play, saying, well, now you're all paired off. I'm so lonely. I will just go cry. And Leontes doesn't get it. He's like, marry Camilla, whatever. But Paulina has spent 16 years partnered with her best friend. And Leontes doesn't recognize the tragedy in that loss for Paulina. So that's how I read it. And then if I could just briefly touch on one of the other questions, this notion of how the early modern audience might react to the 16-year jump. I teach a lot of revenge tragedy. There was weirder stuff happening on the early modern stage by a long shot. Death by poisoned coins and crowns and self-braining against a wall, etc. So also the genre of stage romance and tragicomedy regularly took in vast expanses of time. I would say that the chorus, the presence of time, is what makes it okay. Just as in Henry V, we have our chorus saying, imagine that we've got France as well as England inside this wooden O, inside the Globe Theatre. So I would say that the audience was as much value as we place on the concepts of the Aristotelian unities, their reality on the stage was almost nil. And so the audience was okay with these vast shifts.
You mentioned, Niamh, the Camillo moment at the end, where Leontius is like, "Oh yeah, you could marry Camillo, Paulina," which at least sometimes will get a laugh in performance when it's done, and also can be interpreted as like, "Yeah, that's right. Everybody should get married at the end." I mean, it's one of those bizarre things in the play where you're like, "Huh?" And then they're like, "Oh yeah, let's just go off stage and tell everybody about how all this really happened." Linda, do you have any theories about Hermione, whether she lives or dies?
I do. For one thing, I will say first off, which I think we just agree about the play in general, is I don't think it matters, for one, in terms of how it's received by the audience. But if anything, I would lean toward Arin. And the reason is because, again, from the inside of it, it still works either way. It works, and the language works either way. That obviously the statements about death and life and dear life redeems you because of the fact that if in fact Hermione has been cloistered for that long, the grief of that, the anger of that, all of the things, even if it's been 16 years, then learning that your daughter is alive when you would have assumed, you know what I mean, that you've been thought that she's dead. It's so massive that I will say that as an actor from the inside of it, it was more useful for me to live in some kind of land of magic and stasis of some kind that is let go. And that's because Shakespeare has given no language to address if it really was all of that. The text that is given is really so formal and almost ritualistic, as Niamh said, in terms of the daughter and only to Perdita. But it's very hard if you, as an actor anyway on the inside, are trying to make sense of that, of 16 years. There's no outlet for the language. And frankly, I think you would just sort of fall apart on the stage or something. And so in the doing of it, I will say for myself, I felt that it was more useful for me to think of it as a moment of magic, at least to a point of some kind, something to live in that world more.
Yeah, I think that's great, Linda. That, as you say, this is not Shakespeare's version of a divorce play, right? It's not something that mundane or prosaic. It's literally emotionally a death play and then a rebirth play, which is a whole other order of emotional existence. And you have to reach that plane by the end of the play or it doesn't work, arguably.
Right, and I think he's given Hermione such unbelievable text earlier in the play, unbelievable language for her to really be both in control as a queen in a very queenly but devastated way, have to express all these things. And that kind of an odd piece of text that occurs when she wakes up basically is it's very something else. And so it seems to me that there really is, just from the inside of it, I can just say that doing it, it felt like it was not my job to try to figure that out. Let the audience choose whatever they wanted. Mine was to come to life in that moment.
It also seems like the reason this crux is so important is because there's life, there's mundane reality, and then there's magic. And in between, there are these liminal spaces that we are asked to pass through, which is the theater, right? And we're back to that metaphor of the statue of the theater of it is required you to awake your faith as an audience and also as actors. And that the play lives on that kind of knife edge, theoretically or aesthetically, which is fascinating. We have filled more than a half hour. It is time for us to take our customary break and hear from Simon Godwin, who is in London rehearsing his Romeo and Juliet, which it will be broadcast on PBS in the spring, and I believe on the BBC at the same time. So Gordon, can we say hello briefly to Simon in London?
Hello. It's great to be with you again this week, and I'm sorry not to be there to talk about The Winter's Tale, one of my favourite plays that I have had the pleasure of directing. Well, it's a short postcard this week. Things are going well in the rehearsal room for Romeo and Juliet at the National Theatre here in London. I'm with Emily Burns, the adapter of the script into the film. And Emily, of course, featured on a previous Shakespeare Hour Live, because Emily also adapted Time of Athens, the production that I directed at Shakespeare Theatre Company. So in a second, I'm going to ask Emily how it's all going for her. I guess one of the highlights for us this week has been seeing Romeo in The Crown, playing Prince Charles. I hope you've had the chance to check it out. It's a terrific performance, although quite different from the Romeo that he's been preparing. Isn't that correct, Emily?
Very different. Certainly less Welsh less Welsh speaking in this production. But it's been terrific to see the density of relationships that are evolving in the rehearsal room. You're always reminded when rehearsing Shakespeare of how much cleverer he is than you ever could be while reading it. And a terrific discovery this week was about the familial resemblance that he's managed to thread through the Capulet family of a sort of inherited intelligence. We're all very aware of Juliet as this hugely intelligent character who really outstrips Romeo's verbal dexterity and races ahead of him. But to discover in this scene that one of her parents has that capacity was really an incredible moment of how well Shakespeare's able to record the absolute complexity and fine detail of real life. So that's my week's. You didn't ask for my highlight, but that is it, I think, actually.
Right, that's your discovery, Emily. Thank you, and I second that. I mean, we've really keep coming back to the rehearsal room to Shakespeare's rhetorician, Shakespeare who's endlessly writing speeches of persuasion. And I can say also, it's been such a privilege bringing a story to life and realizing how much stories have to offer us in this time. And I can't wait to share the ultimate Romeo and Juliet film with all of you in America via PBS in the spring. And that's all from me this week. See you next time. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that production. Simon was telling us today about the discoveries he was making about Lady Capulet, who in this production has been given Lord Capulet's lines. So is this like very powerful, strong mother figure. Well, the second half of the show, we always ask our guests to prepare some text. So I figure, Arin, since you patiently waited and went last with the first round, I wonder if you have a passage that you'd like to highlight, hold up, celebrate, share with us, and maybe also if you could contextualize a little bit why you chose this passage from The Winter's Tale.
Yeah, well, I have a couple different thoughts here, folks. I mean, I think that the most important line in the play is what you quoted, which is, it is required that you do awake your faith. That to me is really the crux of everything. But that's just one line. So, I mean, I don't know. I then was looking at the amazing penultimate scene with the gentlemen, you know, the lords, the three lords. Which sometimes people are like, I'm just going to cut that scene when you just cannot cut that scene, and it's so amazing. But it's long, so I decided. But it's all about how incredible the events are. It's where the three gentlemen, I think it's three or maybe it's four, but it's three gentlemen and Autolycus relate the reunion of Perdita and Leontes and Polixenes and Leontes, and it's about how it is not to be believed, really. And then there is the story about the statue and the bear. It's like all of this exposition, but it's a scene of wonder. It's a really, really powerful scene. It's a killer. But then I thought maybe I would just, what do you want? You want me to read this? You're going to be disappointed in my reading.
Well, just to second you, Arin, that scene, I think it's Act 5, Scene 2, is, I have learned so much from that scene as a dramaturg, because it's Shakespeare not showing, but telling us about these events, which are too emotional, too wondrous to be believed. And you would say, well, it's all redundant information. We already know, we saw all this stuff happen in the play. You can just cut this. But no, you need to see these characters be astonished. And I, just hearing you describe it and getting verklempt, thinking about the emotions that are stirred up by that scene.
It's amazing. Like even the oracle in this play, which is frankly annoying. But even the oracle is prepping you for that final scene. And like the audience needs that primer just before the final scene like to be infected with wonder in order for Hermione coming to life to land, in my opinion. It's like this incredible, these dramaturgical seeds that are without which the play doesn't work, I think.
And you really do get a sense that Shakespeare, by this point in his career, is such a master that he knows when to show and when to tell. And he makes every choice extremely deliberately.
And he made the mistake in Pericles with 2 reunion scenes.
Exactly. He learned, or he got the idea for the Winter's Tale from Pericles, but he bungled the execution of it. Yeah. He didn't handle he didn't handle Pericles' atonement the way he handles Leontes' atonement. It's so fascinating to compare those 2 plays. I think that's better than sharing a passage with us, Arin, because you're synthesizing for us. Linda, you're looking down.
Well, because I just think we have to say it. We got to read it. It's the one we're all talking about. So it's just those about 10 lines. She says, "It is required you do awake your faith. Then all stand still. Or those that think it is unlawful business I am about, let them depart." Leontes says, "Proceed, no foot shall stir." Music. Awake her. Strike. 'Tis time. Descend, be stone no more, approach. Strike all that look upon with marvel. Come, I'll fill your grave up. Stir, nay, come away. Bequeath to death your numbness, for from him dear life redeems you. You know.
Linda, that was beautiful. I'm so glad that we could hear the whole passage. Thank you.
And I believe
no way to not hear that and get stirred. There's no way.
No, I'm feeling very misty and moisty right now. Niamh, I believe this is the first cue for non-diegetic music in the entire play. Autolycus sings songs in Act 4, but when Paulina says music, strike, it's like magic music. It's like music that comes out of the very atmosphere. And I'll never forget when we did it at STC, we had the entire back wall of the theater lift up and expose the musicians who had been there the whole time playing. And it was like, you know, this Brechtian moment that was just brilliantly theatrical. Have you chosen a passage you want to highlight?
I have. I'm bad at superlatives, so I have a couple of options. But I wanted to highlight Paulina's role as a tale teller, and also break in some of that great dinner party conversation of mine about childbirth in the early modern period. Because Paulina performs the function of midwife, or at least the legal function of midwife. Did you know that midwives in this time were licensed by the church? Their position held legal weight. Their words, their articulations held legal weight because childbirth was managed exclusively by women. No male medical professionals were involved in childbirth. If you've read Tristram Shandy, you know about how all this changed. But the childbirth managed by women, and then it would be the midwife who would present the child to the father and say, "This is your child." And that articulation was a legal statement, right? Midwives could be called to testify in legitimacy cases, and among other cases. So I'm going to pastiche together several lines of Paulina's from the Act 2, Scene 2 and Act 2, Scene 3. So 2-2 is when she goes to the prison where the heavily pregnant Hermione has been locked away, learns that Hermione has given birth, and says, "Give me the child. I'm going to take it to Leontes. He must be told on it, and he shall. The office becomes a woman best. I'll take it upon me. If I prove honey-mouthed, let my tongue blister. I'll show it the king and undertake to be her advocate to the loudest. I'll use that tongue I have." And then when she gets in front of Leontes, "I say I come from your good queen." Leontes says, "Good queen? Good queen, my lord, good queen. I say good queen." I love that triptych of good queen, to take a line of pentameter and repeat so much. It calls to mind Lear of never, 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 never. A little further down, presenting Perdita to Leontes, "It is yours. And might we lay the old proverb to your charge, so like you, 'tis the worse. Behold, my lords, although the print be little, the whole matter and copy of the father. Eye, nose, lip, the trick of his frown, his forehead, nay, the valley, the pretty dimples of his chin and cheek, his smiles, the very mold and frame of hand, nail, finger, and thou, good goddess nature, which hast made it so like to him that got it, if thou hast the ordering of the mind too, mongst all the colors, no yellow in it, lest she suspect, as he does, her children, not her husband's." I love how Shakespeare has written into the play the power of the woman's voice in asserting legitimacy, in insisting upon maternal and paternal care. Paulina's role is so brilliantly crafted and so beautifully performed in this moment. And I have argued elsewhere that she midwifes Hermione back into life at the end. In that passage you so beautifully just read, Linda. Yeah, you have a thought on that? Or
Please do, Linda.
I had thought, just because it came from, it has to do with, it's a similar thing, but it also has to do with what we were talking about before about just embracing the structure of the play. And that is that I remember from the Goodman production in Chicago when I played Paulina, that there's this one thing that really surprised me in the take of it. And that was that at the top of 5, which of course comes right on the heels of the insanity of 4, you have Cleomenes who's saying, to the king, "You've done enough now." Like, stop. He's telling Leontes, "It's enough already." You know what I mean? Basically, that's enough. You're sad. You've been. It's really, get on with it. And Leontes says, "I can't. Like, I can't do that. My blemishes are so bad, and I've destroyed the sweetest companion that e'er man bred his hopes out of." And Paulina's line is, "True, too true, my lord." And it surprised the heck out of me. But I think it came, which I will lead to, because of where it comes from, even if there's an intermission before Act 5 or whatever, because of where the audience has been, you get this slide in at the top of 5, I think. And it really surprised me that when I said, as Paulina, "True," and the pentameter of it would be "True, too true, my lord," or if you want to play with it and surprise it a little, you can say "True, too true, my lord," and play with it a little and make a point of it. But either way, but I could, from the first time we did it in front of an audience, when I said "true," the audience just started laughing. They're so with Paulina and so on what she's doing, because of course it's in the same passage right after that where she ends up using the word, the woman you killed. And he goes, "Wait, killed? Wow, ouch, a bit of killed." But she's right. But it's that strength of Paulina and the wisdom of her, and that they're so, relieved to have the truth spoken. But also, again, I think Shakespeare's given this weird transition that coming off of what you've come off of, you don't just immediately go to this ruthless dark place. There is space in there for the audience to actually enjoy the pain in a way that this man has gone through. But yes, about Paulina, I can only say that I've never played a part that from beginning to end, when she opens her mouth, the audience is just like, yes, yes, yes. And they just love it. It's a joy to play it.
Well, in the section that you quoted, Niamh, she calls herself an advocate. And what seems to me Shakespeare's doing is that Leontes famously puts Hermione on trial, has her in this kind of kangaroo court, this like Stalinist banana republic, I'm going to execute you trial. And then for the rest of the play, Paulina is putting Leontes on trial. She is prosecuting Hermione's case as a witness for the defense, even after she's dead. And there are so many layers to that top of Act 5, because you get Cleomenes saying you should marry again, and then Perdita walks in and he says, oh, you look so much like this woman I was once married to, which is a really creepy moment in performance and is often cut. But, and Paulina is there on his shoulder saying, nope, you swore a vow of celibacy, you can't get married. Don't even think about it, Buster, marrying somebody who could be your daughter, who is your daughter, by the way. So many levels in what's going on there. And of course, Pericles also has incestuous overtones, shall we say, for sure.
You could even argue that The Tempest does, with Prospero's unfortunate fixation on his daughter's virginity.
Yeah, he seems very preoccupied to a disturbing extent by her sex life. Grace Ann, we have about 4 minutes left from this amazing conversation. It's flown by. I've learned so much. It's been so great to be reacquainted. Do we have a few more questions, one or two, that we can answer before we have to go?
Yes, so I'm going to piggyback off a question I offered earlier. Several people are really curious about Leontes' jealousy. And maybe we could start with you, Arin, how you address that as a director. And, Niamh and Linda, we'd love to hear your thoughts too. But, several people are wondering about it. So maybe if we could just hear your takes before we leave.
Right, and maybe how to justify it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Dramatically.
Well, I don't know. I think there are a lot of, there are a lot of different ways that people justify it. Sometimes they make Polixenes really sexy, or or it's age, or, I think there are a bunch of ways that people try to make it understandable, but at its core, it's, like Iago, it is based on nothing. It is a fabrication. And that is part of what is so hideous about it, and so insidious. So I think the structure of Leontes is that, to me, he's almost like a stand-up comedian in his relationship to the audience. And I think that he gets the audience on his side, not by a logical reason for his jealousy, like you see them kind of kissing necks, or whatever he describes. I don't think that there's actually a reason. And it is his exquisite language and his delicious offensive misogyny and his direct address and the way he enlists the audience into brings them onto his team. I think that's how he sways the audience. But I think the point is that there is no real seed there. There is no, it's very frustrating, but I think that is kind of important.
Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, I think absolutely, I agree. I think that it is a problem for the actor playing it to solve for himself, to find a way to get there. But I think that from the outside, the insanity is the point. That's the point. And that the flip of it, the craziness of it, because it's what you can feel again from doing the play in the audience. They're just thrown off and they're furious, and they're, as it goes and everything, and forward. And the height of it is, of course, with the oracle that comes, which is as clear as a bell. This is true, this is true, this is true, 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 or not true, or whatever else, but this is the truth. And to that, he, just says, yeah, well, no. And I will say that in rereading the play in the last couple of days, I would find that my heart rate would go up in those sections, partly really because of what we're going through right now in this country and have gone through for a while. And
where's Paulina now? Where is she right now?
Because in the face of just truth, you know what I mean? And I might say there's the insanity of it is, I think, critical to the play and critical to the dynamics of the play. I think it's critical.
I also wonder, I think that's all absolutely true, but I also wonder how much of it is about the fragile male ego, because there's a lot between Leontes and Mamilius early in the play. And he describes Mamilius as being like an unripe peas cod, I believe, and like Mamilius in the period would have been dressed in kind of androgynous or feminine clothing. And him and Polixenes knew each other as adolescent boys. And there seems to be some kind of a triangular thing that Leontes he's a man, he's ripe, he's performing the role of masculinity, but there's something about his sexuality and his gender identity that is not secure, that he then projects outward in this kind of rageful way. Maybe this is just, I have an identical twin brother. So like, I think that like Polixenes and Leontes, I have always understood as being twin-like figures who reflect back to each other their own identity in this really fascinating way. And of course, Shakespeare was obsessed with twins. So it makes sense that Polixenes being there, he would see something that is in himself. Yeah, if you're nodding your head.
Just, I think a word that came into my mind, Linda, when you were talking was gaslighting. That Leontes is gaslighting the court and nobody is stopping him. Who is driving the car, right? And there is something that feels resonant about that. But also, to your point, Drew, I'm not sure if you and your audience are familiar with the Hogarth Shakespeare novels, but Jeanette Winterson's The Gap of Time, which is an adaptation of The Winter's Tale, states that her, Leontes, and Polixenes had a sexual relationship with each other in their adolescence. And I think that that's an amazing context for Leontes' jealousy. If he is so attracted to Polixenes, how could he believe Hermione would resist Polixenes? And that language of twinning is in the play. When Polixenes and Leontes are recalling their childhood friendship, they were as twinned lambs. And they were like that until their wives got in the middle and pulled them apart. So there does seem to be this sorrow for a lost male closeness that then turns into this tension where Leontes believes. There's also one of my favorite lines in all of Shakespeare is when Leontes is in this relentless downward spiral, gaslighting himself. And it's, I have drunk and seen the spider, all right, which is just a wonderful encapsulation of how your own misconceptions can drive you around the bend with jealousy.
No, it makes perfect sense to me, at least, that Leontes, he thinks Hermione wants to have sex with Polixenes because he wants to have sex with Polixenes. So maybe, that's just like a kind of mind-blowing idea we can leave everyone with to ponder. You all have been such wonderful guests. I want to thank you all for making time to be with us live this Wednesday evening. Thank you, Grace Ann, for guest co-hosting with me. And next week, it is Thanksgiving, and we will be giving thanks. So join me and Grace Ann as we count our blessings and relive some of the Shakespeare Hour Live's greatest hits. That's right, we're doing a clip show for Thanksgiving for you to relive the last 6 months since April of all of our guests and all of their insights. We hope you'll join us live. We will be here live, probably with adult beverages, as we take this trip down memory lane. So until next Wednesday, this is Drew Lichtenberg signing off.